Hello, I'm Rachel Sandbrooks. I'm a writer and comedian, and this is the Stand By Your Nan podcast.
I've been a wild rover for many a year, and I spent all my money on whiskey and beer.
This week, the episode is entitled Nan of Steel, The Origin Story. And I'll be talking about the early life of my Nan as an ordinary woman at the beginning of last century, and introducing my guest for this episode, Sarah Keyworth, an award-winning comedian with her own BBC Radio 4 series, Are You a Boy or a Girl? How exciting to have her on. And her grand story shows an absolute Nan of Steel. So expect stories, an interview, nostalgia, and questions such as, what was the history of my super gran? Anecdote. Eve was my maternal grandmother, and her life tells one story of the whole of the 20th century. She was born in 1911 and she died in 2009. But given her views on life after death, she might still be floating around here, you never know, just offering a fairy cake out of an ethereal quality street tin. Here you go, love. I'm amazed when we hear tales of women from the early 20th century surviving so much oppression. Like when my Nan was born, she wouldn't have been able to vote until she was in her 30s and certainly not get much education. She became a stealth artist, painting in the back room whilst being a housewife in the kitchen. My Nan's earliest memory was during 1914 in Birmingham, whilst my great-grandfather George was fighting abroad in the Great War, or World War I as we know it. My great-grandmother Nellie was home alone, a single parent with 4 children, and just the king's shilling to live on, which was a lot less than universal credit. Little Eve, at the age of 3, is wandering the streets with Eric, her big brother, who was 5. Struggling with a wheelbarrow between them and not quite knowing what they're supposed to be doing because their mother Nellie had shoved them out the door and told them, "Don't come back till you found some coal." I can just imagine my little Nan. "Where are we going, Eric? I don't know." Their mother Nellie could only afford to heat or eat, and so she sent the littlest ones out to steal the heat. Which means my Nan's earliest memory is of being a 3-year-old thief. She was a rebel from the start, but she wasn't the only one. I imagine great gangs of toddlers were roaming the streets like baby Peaky Blinders going, "Gimme coal or I'll cut ya." Yeah, they weren't very rich, but they weren't that poor either. They were quite posh really. They had their own outside loo. My granddad lived in the back-to-backs and they only had one loo to the entire street. My first memories of my Nan are of her telling me these stories. She'd say, "Go and get some coal," she said. I don't know where she expected us to find it. Neighbour's coal hole? Eve was a rebel as a child. She loved to climb trees, scale walls, jump off small buildings, like an amateur parkour. At the age of 8, probably pretending to be in the circus, she climbed up a tree and fell off onto railings. Thinking she'd get told off, she went straight to her bedroom and her mother Nellie only found out later when she discovered Eve covered in blood. I mean, it was a time before the NHS, so they had to call the doctor out, who left her to it, but said she'd never have children. She was then left to survive or not in her bedroom, delirious and hallucinating, but she survived. I know all about survival. I was a child of the 70s and 80s, and if you were around in that decade, you are lucky to be alive. I nearly died 3 times before I was 8 years old. My kids are teenagers. They haven't nearly died once, the snowflakes. The best test for how old you are is to ask the question, how many people can you get in a car? Ask a millennial how many kids you can get in a car. 5 or 6 tops. No, mate, you can get 20 teenagers in the boot, 5 grands on the back seat holding babies, dad's driving with his elbows on the steering wheel, drinking a pint in one hand, cigarette in the other, smashing into a tree. And that's just the school run. If you survived, it was a miracle. My Nan had a bottle of R. White's lemonade under the sink that was filled with bleach. No child lock. One why decant bleach? It's not port. It doesn't need to breathe. And 2, if you drank that, it was your fault. It was like the Hunger Games, except for worse, because at least Katniss had a bow and arrow. I'm not impressed. All I had to fend off murderers and 80s TV presenters was a Bunty annual and a packet of pickled onion Monster Munch. Hunger Games? Blimey, Katniss. Try eating Spam. You'll never be hungry again. The interview. So thank you very much for coming, Sarah. It's really nice to have you on the Stand By Your Nan podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's lovely to be here.
And if you could just, we ask everyone as we get started, like, what is a Nan story you can recall, or just tell me about your grandmother's.
So the grandmother of mine that I knew most was my mum's mum. Her name was Ursula Leonard, and she passed away when I was about 14, I think. And so my memories of her are all from my childhood, and she was just I mean, I'm sure you get most people coming on here, they're talking about their nans, they'll say that she was like the most wonderful woman in the world. Mine was, though. Like, I don't mind. Anybody else could say that. Anyone else could claim that. Mine was the best, right? She was amazing. She was so kind and fun and warm and silly, and she had all this sort of bizarre quirks and habits. She was diabetic, and like at one point I found she had a larder, and I found a heart, like a square of Kit Kat in her larder wrapped in tinfoil. And I asked her what she was doing with it, and she said, I'm saving it for a rainy day. And I just think that sort of sums her up. She's an odd little lady, but really sweet. And she loved games. She liked playing games. Her favourite game was Triominoes.
Oh, yeah.
Which is like dominoes, but with triangles. So, which is like, it's like take Granny and really go for it. Like Granny times 100, isn't it? It was great. Yeah, she was very, very good. And I was a child, so I was rubbish at it, but she always let me win, which I think is a sign of a good gran, isn't it? She was amazing.
Brilliant.
She was a wonderful lady. She had the best house.
Yeah. What was that house like?
It was just full of really sort of fascinating little old objects, like tiny little pot objects that I don't know whether someone she knew had made them, or whether just like I think she had one that was like a sloth, a tiny little sloth, and then she'd have like ornamental Christmas pudding all year round. and I'm trying to think what else. Like a little wooden old man. Fascinating, like a weird museum playground. And some of the items from the house sort of recur in my life now. Like my brother might have some, or like my mom might have some things knocking about, and I'll look at it and go, that is honestly quite weird. that was pride of place in my grandmother's house for some reason.
It really sounds like my nan. She had the same thing. She had a kind of a glass cabinet that had really weird little ornaments in them that you would never touch. And they were literally there for 50 years and nobody ever opened that cabinet because it was too good to, it had the nice stuff in it. So you couldn't actually do anything with it.
But I don't know where they came from. Like, I can't imagine a scenario in which you would receive or purchase something like that. It's just, it feels like at some point you become a nan and you're handed a box of bizarre objects. And your challenge as a nan is to just sort of scatter them around the house and hope nobody questions it. Very strange.
That. Yeah. Mine used to have like a tiny little dog in a basket. And like you, I don't know where it came from. No. But it must have been really old because it had like real fur on it.
Yeah. Like, ooh, yeah.
Who would want that? Who would want that there? But it was also really cute. It's like
a few bits and pieces like that. My this was something my grandfather bought. He had to do a trip away in America at some point when my mum was a child. My grandfather died when my mum was 14. So this was a long time ago. And so at some point, my mum found that he'd bought her like an original Barbie doll.
Oh, wow.
And she's still got it in a weird little... it is a box. I want to say coffin. Because that was what it looks like. And that's just sort of the kind of thing that was sort of pulled out of my grandmother's house. Just very, very strange objects.
Yeah, and then what do you do with them? That's the other thing. It's a bit
What do you do with them? That's in a drawer in our kitchen, because every so often my dad gets it out and goes, oh, look at this. And then we all go, oh, yeah, no, that's very interesting. And then he pops it back in the drawer for the next time. That's what you do with it. It's in the kitchen at my parents' house. It's in that, that sort of nonsense drawer in the kitchen that's got like elastic bands and batteries. Yeah. My parents' house also has an original Barbie doll. For no reason. Very odd. Very odd.
I know in my nan's larder, she used to bring out a can that had no label on it that was rations from World War One.
No
That's
way.
because it was her dad had gone into World War One, and she was always like, "Oh, we could open that. It'd be all right because it's in a tin."
Yeah, you'd be like, but we don't have to. The best part about this being post Second World War is that we don't have to open that can of rations.
I really wanted to though, and I never know where. Yeah, right, I never knew where it was.
You don't even know what type of food it was.
Yeah, have no idea. Probably stew was the.
Yeah, I was going to guess like spam or something like that.
Yeah, I think spam
probably wasn't all right.
It would have been a brilliant kind of box opening thing. Unboxing.
Yeah. If YouTube had been around.
Yeah.
Back then.
Ages ago. Yeah. So that was your one land called Ursula as well. What a brilliant
Ursula
name.
Leonard. Yeah, German. She fled Germany. I think I've said the age 14 3 times already. Yeah. I think my grandmother died when I was 14. My grandfather died when my mum was 14, and I'm fairly confident when my grandmother was 14, she left Germany because it was just pre-World War II. And
wow,
my grandmother was German Jewish, and obviously all of the anti-Semitism stuff was ramping up. And so the weird thing about this, when you asked me to come and do this, I thought, yeah, I'd love to do that. I'd love to talk about my grandmother. And then I remembered something that happened this Christmas. I managed to get home to my family this Christmas, and we were sat around the table, and somebody said something, and I had this moment where I must have had this piece of information in my head maybe at some point, but I learned properly that not only was my grandmother German, but so was my grandfather. And I didn't know. And everybody, like my brother, he's an archaeologist, he's big into history, he's very, very interested in family history. I'm interested too, but I am a airhead. And he was like, I actually can't believe you didn't know that. That's quite embarrassing. And my mum sort of jumped to my defense and said, well, actually, no, to be fair, like Granny didn't talk about anything that happened.
Yeah. So
she left Germany pre-war. I think one of the few stories that I was told was that she went into school, and they were in an assembly, and they asked all of the Jewish children to stand up and told them to go home.
Oh my God.
And it was around, I think shortly after that, my grandmother and her sister, her younger sister Anna-Me, were sent to the UK, to Cambridge, and they were separated. So they both went to live with different families. So that's Ursula Leonard.
God, that's incredible.
I think her maiden name was Lisa.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so I'm embarrassingly ignorant about that family history, but partially because very, very self-involved stand-up comedian, just float around thinking about butterflies and making jokes about my fanny, and partly because it wasn't talked about very much. So, but I probably should have asked. To be fair, I was, as I say, I was 14. Can't stress that enough. So was it a very self-indulgent time in my life? But yeah, it's a shame that I didn't get to ask more questions. It's something that I'd love to learn more about in terms of my grandmother's life and what she went through. But in terms of Nans of Steel,
Yeah.
good old Nana Steel over here.
Blimey. So she was 14. Did she meet up with her sister again?
Yes, yeah, they found each other again. Yeah, I don't know how many years it was, but I think that they kept in contact whilst they were living with separate families. But they stayed in contact, and her sister is still alive, and we're still in touch with that side of the family and everything like that. She's 90, I think.
Oh wow.
Yeah, she's 90.
That's incredible. Well, after this, you'll have to pick up the phone and go and speak to her.
Yeah, I mean, you should. Yeah,
I don't judge at all, because this show's taken me about 20 years to actually do. I always wanted to do something about Nans, but yeah, being exactly what you said.
Yeah, I am, because I was talking to somebody about this the other day, because it sort of gets more fascinating, and it's something that I'd quite like to maybe just do a bit more on. And I've actually got a message on my phone from my mum from Monday of this week, because we are, on that side of the family, we're related to a famous German painter.
Oh wow.
And which is, yeah, it's very fascinating and interesting. His name's Max Lieberman. He's and I was talking to someone and I was saying, but honestly, I couldn't really tell you that much more. And she was saying, this is absurd, that like anyone else I know who finds out that they're related to somebody famous would find out as much information as possible. But your family collectively found out that you were related to a famous German painter, and you specifically were like, yeah, no further questions. I don't, and I've had to messaged my mum on Monday after that conversation saying, also, can you please remind me once again how I am related to Max Lieberman? And my mum replied saying, I think Max was your great grandmother's uncle. So,
wow,
great grandmother's uncle. So I don't know what that is. But,
you are related, but it is quite far back.
It's far back, yeah. But I've definitely got that written down now, so I can't forget it again.
Amazing. How do you think your grandmother met your grandfather? Like, if they were both German, did they meet in England?
They met in England, yes, which is what I learned this Christmas. Oh, it's so embarrassing. And I feel like I was told how they met. Oh, Christ, this feels like a quiz.
I'm just fascinated.
They met. How did they meet? Well, my grandfather was a professor, and my grandmother, do you know what? I haven't got the foggiest of clues, but which is bad, but I'll find out. And we'll do another episode and I'll fill in the blanks. But yeah, they met in England, in Cambridge. So my mum was born in Cambridge and then moved to Nottingham, which is where they are now. And no, I tell a lie. Do I tell a lie? No. My mum was born in Cambridge and then the whole family moved to Nottingham.
Was that
sticking with that. That's my final answer.
Was that because of your grandfather being a professor or something, or was it
that they moved to Nottingham? Yeah, I think it was for his work. Let's go with that.
Yeah.
Do you know what? Even if anybody fact checks this, it's not going to be who's nobody's going to tell me. I'm just going to answer with confidence now. I'm going to rewrite history, tell you what I think happened, and then we could do a little document of my mum's amendments at the end.
Yeah, I have to say at this point it's slightly family affair, because the co-producer is your cousin, and he's just messaged me saying that his dad said that your nan was a counsellor.
Yes. So my grandmother, and I found this out recently, I think she was a couples counsellor, but the way because I had it in my head, honestly, absolutely useless. I thought she was a nurse, which I think she was. She worked sort of as a nurse. She was a couples counsellor, but basically, I met up with a cousin on, because Stephen is my cousin on my dad's side, so it's separate family.
Yeah.
But it's interesting that he has information too from his dad about my grandmother. But I met up with a cousin on my mum's side. I hadn't seen her in like 10 years. And we hadn't seen each other since our grandmother passed away. And she's a bit older than me, so I think she maybe had a bit more information about our grandmother as well. And also probably like even like a molecule of being slightly more engaged would have helped anybody out. But she said, oh, now I think about it, it's so cool that our grandmother was a sex therapist. And that's how I found out about that. I had absolutely no idea. And it's not a sentence anybody should really have to hear in their life, I don't think. Because most people don't acknowledge the fact that their grandmothers knew about sex. Whereas I have to wrestle with the fact that potentially mine was something of an expert.
My grandmother was a sex therapist.
Yeah.
Is the title of your next show? Maybe.
My next show. Yeah.
That I can understand that. I think that's part of the reason why I started doing this was because just that thing that we have, like almost like a cut off. It's like once you've got to grandmother stage, like whatever your idea of what a grandmother is, it's such a role that is kind of stereotyped, that those things are not allowed to come into play. Like you have to be short, have white curly hair or something, and never ever admit
you've
to
nailed
ever
it.
having
I've actually got a picture of my grandmother in my room.
Oh, look.
And you honestly, I mean, this is not great podcast content, but
I'll do the audio description. A picture of...
Yeah. I mean, you've already done the audio description.
Yeah, a short woman with quite curly, wavy, white hair.
Yeah.
And glasses.
Nice knitted jumper, check shirt. Very stylish, actually.
Yeah.
Quite hipster-esque. She did a good job. But yeah, and I think it's interesting because I was the youngest of my cousins on that side of the family, and so we all have different memories, but mine are all very sort of young memories of my grandmother sort of treating me like a child, because I was a child, whereas my cousin Simon has memories of, and I think he might be sort of 5 years older than me. He told me recently that he used to watch Sex and the City with my grandmother. Which just completely blows my mind, because the woman I knew had never heard of Sex and the City, but the woman that he knew thought she was a Samantha. So it's completely fascinating.
She must have had a lot to say about that as well, being a sex therapist.
Yeah, it's genuinely fascinating. I feel, it's a shame. I feel like I missed out on a side of her that other people got to see, because as far as our conversations never went further than hummus, really. She was big into hummus.
Did she do any baking with you, or any classic Nan things like that? Yeah,
we did a lot of baking. All of my mum's gotten into baking now, but most of my sort of reference points of baking and memories of baking with my grandmother. And I was one of those horrible children that would just be trying to shove their fists in the bowl throughout the entire process, just itching to like lick a spoon the whole time. But she was very patient with me, and she in terms of food and things like that, she had interesting pronunciations of things. Like I don't know whether it's the slight German side, because she didn't have a German accent, and she never spoke in German at all. I never heard her talk in German at any point. And apparently, according to my mum, and this happens with a lot of refugees, is if they move over and they'll stop speaking the language, they just acclimatise. And she, for a long time, I think she thought in German but talked in English. And I never, but then occasionally she'd say things like, she called pizza. So me and my brother always call pizza now. And tofu for tofu. Though actually I think that's quite a common, that's a little bit of a tomato situation with tofu. But she was vegetarian. And so a lot of the old vegetarian-y classics, tofu and chickpeas and hummus, remind me of her.
Was she always vegetarian, do you think? That's fairly unusual, isn't it? I know my nan was really into
Yeah.
health food, but
I think I don't know if she always was. As long as I was around, she was vegetarian, and I think she was allergic to seafood, so that might have been a part of it. But yeah, always vegetarian. Little vegetarian granny.
She sounds absolutely lovely as a granny.
She was great. Yes, classic. Yeah, but with this entirely secret side that I never saw.
It's interesting talking about how she was a refugee and she moved to a whole new country when she was 14. And that must have been just incredibly hard. But I was also trying to consider, like, being a young woman today is just incredibly hard as well, but in a very different way. But you can get completely, like, with all the online abuse that goes on and things. I just wondered, sometimes we kind of think about young people and old people as very different. And I'm kind of wondering, well, what can we learn from that, apart from the fact that it does seem to me that people don't talk about it. So sometimes it's quite hard to try and draw parallels or connections. I don't know.
It seems like, if you think about my grandmother's generation versus what's going on today, it seems like completely different worlds. It feels like completely different worlds from when I was a teenager, in terms of the way that, like, the technology has changed things. I feel old looking at stuff going on the internet now, like being 27 years old. Like Stephen and I have she's not our cousin, she's our cousin's child, who is, I think, 18 maybe, and I look at her on social media and I think it's mad. I can't sort of comprehend the attention and I think even when she was young, when she was sort of 13, 14, she had quite a big social media following. I was like, I can't imagine being in touch with that many people, having that many people knowing who I am and seeing who I am at 13, 14 years old. I think my grandmother would be completely baffled by the entire. When she was that age, she came over from Germany and wanted to blend in. So I can't imagine her wanting, like, really understanding this sort of desire to have everybody looking at you. I can obviously understand that a bit. I love a bit of attention. But I think it's the difference between controlled attention and sort of voyeuristic attention that's quite nerve-wracking about social media. I nearly brought up the Meghan Markle interview just then, but there's a clip of hers that where she made a really interesting point, and I don't know if it was in the actual broadcast version of the interview, but she was saying, in terms of her interest in privacy, was that, like, if you were at work and you had a picture of your child on your desk and somebody came over and said, oh, that's a lovely picture, is that your child? And you went, oh yeah, that's my kid. And they went, oh great, well now you've shown me that one, can I have your phone and can I see every picture in your camera roll? And she was likening the way that they're treated to that behavior, because it's like she agrees to have one picture out in the world and then everyone goes, oh, why, what if you put that out, why do you want privacy? Why? And I think it's that scary thing about social media, is that it's never enough.
Yeah,
people want more and more and more and more. And I think that's very tricky, especially for women who. I mean, I don't think it's changed at all. I think it's changed in the nature of the way women are talked to. The language has changed, but the sort of general core premise of attitudes towards women, I don't think has evolved as much as we kind of think it is. That obviously there's been a lot of horrible stuff in the news this week, and I was talking to my mum about it. There's been loads of conversations about the fear you feel as a woman being out late at night. And my mum said to me on the phone, she said, I remember 50 years ago in Nottingham, running. She said, I remember running as fast as I could from the bus stop to my parents' house because I was afraid of being out on my own. And she would run as quickly as she could. And she said I said that she was always jealous of her best friend Sally, because her best friend Sally's dad would come and meet her at the bus stop. And that was 50 years ago, and nothing's changed. And it was a really poignant thing, actually, because when I was sort of that age, my mum used to send my dad to meet me at the bus stop when I was 17, 18. My mum would send my dad down, and I'd get so annoyed. I'd be so frustrated because I go, nobody else's dad comes down. It's embarrassing. Like, I can walk from, it would be less than 5 minutes, maybe a 3-minute walk. I can walk up our road. And then she said that to me on the phone, and I was thinking about it, and I was just thinking, all she was doing was doing for me what she would have liked to have had when she was my age. She was just providing me with that safety and that comfort that she didn't have, and remembering how it felt. And I was so ungrateful about it. But I don't know if I've answered your question. I've sort of just, but like in some ways, it's I think recently it's kind of on everyone's minds that it's slightly you kind of despair a little bit, that you're like, has anything changed? Has it changed that much? That's a bleak thing to reflect upon, isn't it?
I think this is the problem, though, isn't it? Is that it doesn't really change unless we talk about it. I mean, that's kind of my mission statement or whatever. But I do think it's really important that we talk about it and that we make connections across generations, and that we say, actually, you know, the reason why a lot of older women sometimes shut down about don't, you know, things like sexual harassment and things, and they say, oh, don't make a fuss. Well, it's because it happened to them and they had to shut up about it. That's why. Yeah. So every time you get somebody doing that or shutting down about certain topics, it's often that. It's like, nobody wants to age as a woman. Why don't you want to age? Because what does that do? Oh, it makes you invisible. But in whose eyes are you invisible? Yeah. Like, what's that actually saying? I think it's a really interesting. I do think it's a really interesting area, and that's the thing. It hasn't changed. Why hasn't it changed after all this time? And why should it be like a survival? In fact, we're talking about survival, but actually for some people, it's just walking from the bus stop home. How should that be? I mean, the most bizarre. This is going to sound like something I've made up, but the most bizarre. It was when my grandmother was in her 80s, somebody came and knocked on the door saying they were selling something, and she went off to get a bit of money, and they snatched the money out of her hand and scared her a little bit, and then after that, I don't know whether my uncle or a friend of hers or somebody bought her a little panic alarm. It's a little egg-shaped thing, and you just pull a key out of it and it makes this massive sound. And then when she passed away, I found it and I put it on my keyring, and I was walking around with it. And somebody said to me at some point, oh, where'd you get that? And I said, oh, it's my grandmother's. And they said, sorry, did you inherit a rape alarm? And I was like, well, yeah, I suppose I did. And I suppose that just sums up everything that we've been saying, is that, like, she needed it at 80, I needed it at 17. And it's not the best thing she left me, but useful. More useful than the little man.
More useful than the creepy wooden man, for sure. He's spooking me out.
Yeah, I think there is definitely power in numbers, isn't there? And maybe it's time to kind of think about supporting people through that. I mean, that is the.
But it's sad. I think it's sad for you sort of said, oh, you know, it's nice to make connections between generations because that can get lost. And for me to go, oh yeah, I've got a connection. We're all scared. We're all terrified.
It is a bit of that, but I think we just have to keep talking about it, maybe. I haven't actually got a solution for that at all.
No, me neither. Yeah.
I mean, I like doing stand-up, but I used to find it quite hard because you go if you're going to travel anywhere outside of your immediate vicinity, you have got to put yourself at risk of being somewhere at 2 o'clock in the morning, trying to find a way home if you haven't driven there. And even driving there, just going to your car at that time of night, it's really hard, isn't it?
And you're being outspoken, which is, you know, putting yourself at risk as well. You're on stage and you're drawing attention to yourself, and you're saying things that might be slightly controversial or even just titillating, I suppose. And then you're walking back to your car or whatever, and I don't know, you're drawing attention to yourself, which is completely like what we should be able to do. That's the job. But it does seem there are moments where it's quite scary. I think there's an amazing comedian called Angela Barnes who set up this scheme a couple of years ago.
Oh yeah.
And it essentially it's just like a fund, and female identifying comedians can access it, and they basically can pay for a taxi home and stuff if they're feeling uncomfortable, which is like really, really good. It's very special.
Yeah, and hopefully we'll be able to use it when we get out.
When we're allowed out. Yeah. We're allowed out and about.
Out of our prisons. I was wondering, like, if you thought there was a way of kind of redefining grandmothers. Like, I don't know, part of me wants to keep the grandmother kind of like a stereotype of this kind of lovely, kindly woman who bakes cakes and doesn't put you in an oven like a witch. That if you were thinking of redefining it, or do you think that it's worth looking at that as do you think it's worth redefining the older woman a bit in today's age? I don't know what I'm saying now. Asking a question.
I guess it's that's kind of part of what you were saying a moment ago, isn't it? That like there's not really a character description that can be more desexualized and almost like dehumanized, in the sense that like this grandmother as a stereotype is this sort of very servile, very lovely and sweet, but like exists to help with the children and bake and read stories. And I suppose it is just even I've done it there in my sort of shock that my grandmother was a sex therapist, or that she watched Sex and the City and things like that. And it's like maybe give a bit more credit. I think there's an amazing comedy show, Motherland. I'm sure you've seen Motherland. But the character of the grandmother in that is amazing, because she's just straight up refusing to look after the children throughout the entire series and hiding from her daughter. The first episode, I think she's come back from a cruise, but she was meant to go, she'd said she's coming back the next day or the next week or something, and her daughter works out that she's back and she's hiding in her house pretending she's not in because she doesn't want to babysit. And I just I think that's kind of an amazing portrayal of a grandmother who's like, no, I'm living my life. I'm going out with my friends. I don't want to just be a childminder from now on, just because you've had a child.
My mom's that kind of grandmother. She just disappears to Spain when it comes to Christmas.
Yeah, fair play.
Just like, I'm going for the buffet and I don't want to see you until Easter.
Don't call me. Yeah, I respect it. That's what I think. Yeah, I think we should redefine grandmothers as like bachelors.
Yeah.
They're the new bachelors.
The new bachelors.
They're going out with their mates. They're drinking what they want. They're free. They're old, free, and single.
Yes. I think that's probably quite a really good one. And what I always ask at the end of these things, so I have to say, I really want to find out more about Max Lieberman and your German grandmother.
Tell you what, Rachel, so do I.
I'm going to be Googling it afterwards.
If you do, can you just send me a little crib sheet? Embarrassing. I have to stress, I am going to find out more. This is my challenge for my next project.
I I really don't blame you though, because I set up this project thinking at some point I really want to do a thing about my nan because she was really interesting. She's like, she was really into spiritualism and weird shit, and she'd just go off and do all these things that she did quite late on in life as well. She did loads of painting and stuff, but she was never really allowed to be that person. So I was always interested in that like duality of how do you live as a like a housewife, an ordinary person who doesn't really exist, and then carry on your life. But then as I went to do it, I realized I couldn't remember half of the things she'd said to me, and I couldn't get stories out of anyone. And I was like,
it's really bad.
Why didn't I write more down?
My grandmother at some point when I was studying history at school gave me a photocopy of her identity card, her Jewish identity card.
Wow.
And I'm sure somebody has it somewhere, but I have no idea where that copy is. Somebody will have the original document, but I don't know where it is. And I'm like, what the hell is wrong with me? I mean, I would have been like 12. So I'm like, the thing that was wrong with you at the time was that you were an idiot. But like, I'm like, that's so fascinating and interesting. But at the time I was like, can we just get through history? Because I'm ready for lunch. Just wish that I'd been a bit more engaged.
Well, you can forgive yourself. You were 12 at the time. And, I think that's the case. As we do kind of load our teens with all this like, oh, you've got your whole life ahead of you and it's all going to be amazing and here's all this really interesting stuff, and the person themselves is just going, no, can't be bothered.
Can't be bothered. I was thinking about that the other day. Obviously children hate going to school, and then I thought about the actual premise of school, which is that you get up, you go in, and then you just go from room to room as somebody teaches you something fascinating. You stop, have a bit of lunch, and then you do a bit more, and then you're home by like 3:30, 4:00. Oh, it sounds great.
It really does, doesn't it?
I want to go back. I want to go back and study, but I don't want to go to university. I want to go to secondary school.
Just teach me everything. I don't want to. I don't have to do anything.
I want to learn.
Yeah, it's great. You just have to just do all the YouTube tutorials you can in a day for
but I'm too lazy. I'm not engaged enough. Yeah, I need a schedule. I need a bell to ring. I need someone to tell me to stop talking and put my phone away.
That'd be brilliant if you could hire someone to do that. I mean, it's completely off topic.
It would be great. That's what you should rebrand grandmothers as. Strange personal trainers for life.
Personal trainers for life. That's brilliant. We should just make them all that. So my question is, what do you want to be when you grow up and become an old lady or old gentleman or elder? Somebody said elders is a better way of putting it, but I always think I don't want to be an old lady, so that's how I think of it. I just can't wait to be really fucking weird. You know, when occasionally you get a grandparent or like an older person who is just bizarre, but everyone's like, don't worry about it, they're old. Yeah, that's what I'm really excited for. Yeah, I might learn magic or something. Oh, that'd be excellent.
I'll be one of those grandparents that learns magic. I want to be a magician. An elderly magician.
If you start now, by the time you're really elderly, you'll be brilliant at it.
That'd be so good. Yeah, the rate that I learn. I need to go back to secondary school to learn magic for my grandchildren. Is what I want. That's my plan.
That's fantastic.
I just want to be a weird old man one day. That's the dream. That's what everyone's living for.
Yeah, I've decided I want to start being weirder. I've got I got too normal. I became a mother, and that just makes you really normal.
Yeah, it puts you on the straight and narrow. You need to. Yeah.
They're going to have to put up with it. I'm going to have to get weirder. So, thanks for that. I'm absolutely rubbish at magic, so I don't think I can follow that one. But yeah,
I've never done a magic trick in my life, but I'm gonna one day.
I'm going to be watching the TV screens for when you come on your show.
Yeah, I'm the next Dynamo.
If you don't do magic, I'll be emailing you going, come on, Sarah.
You still haven't researched your grandmother and you can't do a magic trick. Get a grip.
So were women tougher during the wars and after, or was it just circumstance that forms character? Though, to be honest, my circumstances just induced a high degree of anxiety. Ask any Gen Xer. Don't worry, it might never happen. And we're up all night. What? What might never happen? Nuclear war again? But is it so different now? I mean, we've got food banks and we're having to rely on footballers to get children fed. But then younger women today are incredible. They've got so much agency and they're not afraid to speak out. My nan's life was gritty. I mean, it wasn't that bad. She did get a toilet inside the house by the age of 50, but she didn't have agency. She didn't have a platform. She was a rebellious kid, given no education. She learnt a trade, but there wasn't much else she could do. She wasn't going to be Picasso or the Prime Minister. So what she did do, she made the best of her life, and that's what we can be proud of. So if your gran didn't do much but bake cakes and sit in the corner, maybe have a think about what put her there. So to paraphrase Patrick Swayze, nobody puts Granny in the corner. I hope you've really enjoyed this episode of Stand By Your Nan with me, Rachel Sandbrooks, and thank you so much to my brilliant guest, Sarah Keyworth. Stand By Your Nan has been written and performed by Rachel Sandbrooks, co-produced with Steve Keyworth, and with music by Lewis Barfoot. It's a Gertie Words production funded by Arts Council England. Never no more will I play Wild Rover. No, never no more. I went to an alehouse I used to frequent, and I told the landlady my money was spent. I asked her for credit. She answered me nay. Such customers yours I could get every day, and it's no